When you think of the most gifted boxers of all time, names like Muhammad Ali, Mike Tyson, or Floyd Mayweather instantly come to mind. But ask the hardcore fans, the ones who've seen every era of the sport, and many will tell you, no one ever looked quite like Roy Jones Jr. At his peak, Roy didn't just win fights. He made world-class opponents look like amateurs. He toyed with them, danced around them, and landed punches from angles no trainer would ever teach. Roy Jones Jr. was so confident in his gifts that he sometimes fought entire rounds with his hands behind his back and still knocked people out. But behind the highlight reels and the swagger was something deeper, a training philosophy unlike anyone else in boxing history. Roy didn't just train to fight, he trained to defy the rules of boxing itself. And that's what we're diving into today, the unorthodox, almost unbelievable training that built Roy Jones Jr. Welcome to Back to Boxing. To understand how Roy Jones Jr. trained to achieve the impossible, you first have to understand what set him apart from every other fighter. Roy wasn't just a boxer who happened to be athletic, he was an elite athlete who chose boxing as his stage. Growing up in Pensacola, Florida, Roy excelled in nearly every sport he touched. Basketball, football, track and field, you name it. But what truly made him different wasn't just raw talent, it was how he used each sport to build something greater. Roy never separated his athletic pursuits into neat little boxes. Instead, he treated them as interconnected pieces of the same puzzle. When he played basketball, he wasn't just working on a jump shot, he was sharpening the hand-eye coordination that would one day let him slip punches by mere millimeters. When he ran track, he wasn't simply chasing speed, he was teaching his body to fire its fast-twitch fibers in perfect sequence, producing the kind of explosive power that fueled his lightning-quick hooks. And maybe the biggest edge of all? Unpredictability. Traditional boxing training tends to create patterns, repetitive drills, practiced footwork, the same combinations thrown 1,000 times. Roy's multi-sport background broke that mold. His movements became unorthodox, chaotic even, which made them nearly impossible for opponents to anticipate. His father, Roy Jones Sr., understood this better than anyone. Instead of pushing his son to focus solely on boxing, he encouraged the multi-sport approach. As he often said, a great athlete can become a great boxer, but a great boxer can't always become a great athlete. That idea became the foundation of Roy's entire philosophy. While other fighters drilled endlessly on fundamentals, Roy was cultivating a deeper kind of intelligence, an athletic awareness that let him improvise in the ring in ways others couldn't even imagine. The result was a fighter who moved like water, fluid, unpredictable, impossible to pin down. Roy didn't just punch fast, he thought fast, reacted fast, and adapted faster than anyone else. His training wasn't just about muscles or stamina. It was about tuning his whole nervous system to operate at a higher frequency, leaving opponents a step behind before they even realized it. The speed revolution. Now let's talk about what Roy Jones Jr. is most famous for, speed that seemed to defy the laws of physics. But Roy's speed wasn't just about throwing fast punches, it was about training his entire body to operate as a high-performance machine where every component worked in perfect harmony. Traditional boxing training focuses on building power through repetition and resistance. Heavy bag work, pad work, weights. The idea is to make your muscles stronger so your punches hit harder. Roy flipped this concept completely upside down. Instead of training for maximum power, Roy trained for maximum efficiency. He understood that in boxing, the fighter who lands first usually wins, regardless of who hits harder. So Roy developed training methods specifically designed to reduce the time between thought and action. One of Roy's trademarks was shadowboxing at ridiculous speeds. While most fighters shadowbox to practice technique, Roy did it to push his nervous system beyond its comfort zone. He would throw combinations faster than his brain could consciously process, training his muscle memory to react before his mind could interfere. It wasn't just about the punches. It was about teaching his entire body to fire in perfect sequence with no wasted movement. But Roy didn't stop at shadowboxing. He sharpened his reflexes with countless rounds on the double-end bag, a tool that punished even the slightest lapse in timing. He mastered the speed bag too, using it not just for rhythm but for hand-eye coordination that carried over into real fight situations. On the heavy bag, he worked in short, explosive bursts, snapping punches with blinding speed instead of settling into the steady, predictable rhythms most fighters fall into. And when he hit the pads, his combinations came so fast and from so many angles that even world-class trainers could barely keep up. The real secret to Roy's speed, though, was his understanding of relaxation. Most fighters tense up when they punch, creating resistance in their own bodies that slows them down. Roy trained to remain loose and fluid at all times, only tightening his muscles in the instant of impact. His punches cracked like a whip, snapping through the air with no internal resistance, carrying maximum speed with minimum effort. This combination of speed drills, timing work, and controlled relaxation created something opponents had never faced before. Roy Jones Jr. wasn't just quick, he was operating on an entirely different rhythm. He could see punches coming, process the information, decide on a counter, and fire back all in the time it took most fighters to extend a single jab. To those watching, it looked supernatural. To Roy, it was simply the result of a lifetime dedicated to training speed, as if it was the most important weapon in boxing. Training outside the box. What truly set Roy Jones Jr. apart wasn't just what he trained, but how he trained. While most of the boxing world was stuck in tradition, repeating the same drills for generations, Roy was experimenting with ideas that seemed closer to science fiction than boxing. As we already discussed, instead of sticking only to the boxing gym, he brought in techniques from other sports. He'd spend hours on the basketball court, sharpening footwork, reaction time, and explosive agility. He even played full games before sparring sessions, forcing his body to adjust instantly from one high-intensity demand to another. This cross-training wasn't random. It built an athletic base that carried over into the ring, letting him move in ways that no other boxer of his era could. But Roy's creativity didn't end there. He blended mental and physical training in ways fighters had never considered. He'd solve math problems or recite numbers while pounding away at the heavy bag, forcing his brain to stay sharp while his body was under stress. The goal was simple: make thinking under exhaustion second nature. In fights, that meant he could read opponents, stay calm, and make split-second decisions while others froze or panicked. His core conditioning was just as brutal as his speed work. A signature drill involved lying on the ground while trainers slammed a medicine ball into his midsection, each impact conditioning him to absorb punishment without flinching. Combined with thousands of sit-ups, twists, and resistance exercises, this built a rock-solid foundation that not only protected him in exchanges, but also gave him the rotational power to throw punches from unexpected angles. Roy also put a twist on the classics. He logged endless miles of road work to build stamina, but mixed in sprint bursts to mimic the explosive pace of a fight. He used the jump rope not just for endurance, but for rhythm and coordination, often pushing himself to keep pace with rapid music beats. Every element of his conditioning was customized to complement his style: fast, explosive, and reactive. Even on the bags and pads, Roy broke away from convention. His pad work wasn't the clean, rehearsed drill you see in most gyms. It was chaos. He would fire off-angle shots, change rhythm mid-combination, and throw punches trainers didn't expect. On the heavy bag, he focused less on power and more on speed, precision, and movement, darting in and out, circling and switching angles as if he was sparring a live opponent. The double-end bag became a testing ground for reflexes, punishing even the smallest lapse in timing, while the speed bag refined his coordination to the point where his hands seemed to blur. And unlike many fighters of his era, Roy valued recovery as part of training itself. Stretching, relaxation exercises, and mental resets were not afterthoughts, but essential components of his routine. He understood that speed and sharpness came from a nervous system that was fresh, not burned out. Long before sports science caught up, Roy was building rest and mental clarity into the core of his program. The result of all this was simple. Roy Jones Jr. didn't just prepare his body, he rewired it. Every unconventional drill, every strange experiment had a purpose. Together they created a fighter who seemed to move in ways that defied logic, a man whose training made the impossible look ordinary, and whose methods kept him one step ahead of some of the most dangerous fighters in history. The mental game. Roy Jones Jr.'s physical gifts were extraordinary, but what truly made him nearly impossible to beat was his mind. He didn't just train for speed and strength, he trained his brain to process information, stay creative, and make decisions at a level that seemed almost superhuman. Roy's mental preparation started with visualization, but his approach went much deeper than the average athlete's. Instead of simply imagining himself winning, he replayed fights in his head with incredible detail. He would run through every punch, every defensive move, every possible response an opponent might throw. By the time he stepped into the ring, he had already fought that fight hundreds of times in his mind. He also combined this with intense film study. Roy wouldn't just watch his opponents, he'd mentally spar with them. He'd learn their habits, anticipate their tells, and rehearse his counters until they became second nature. On fight night, it often looked like he could predict their next move, because in a sense, he already had. Another part of his mental training was what he called fight intelligence, the ability to adapt instantly under pressure. Most fighters stick to patterns and rely on muscle memory. Roy trained to break those patterns. In sparring, he would deliberately change his style mid-session, starting as an aggressive pressure fighter, then switching to a slick counterpuncher, then finishing as a pure boxer mover. This constant switching forced his brain to stay fluid and prevented him from ever being trapped in one mode of fighting. Confidence was also a central part of Roy's mental game. But for him, confidence wasn't just bravado, it was a tool he sharpened. He understood how belief directly impacts performance, faster reactions, higher pain tolerance, and clearer thinking under fire. Roy trained himself to remain calm, certain, and unshakable, even in the face of the most dangerous opponents in the world. He also built what he called pressure simulation. Instead of training in quiet gyms, he'd prepare in chaotic environments, bright lights blinding him, music blasting, people shouting distractions. By the time he got to an actual fight, the chaos felt familiar, even comfortable. Breaking the rules. Perhaps the most fascinating part of Roy Jones Jr.'s training philosophy was his complete disregard for convention. While most fighters were drilled to follow the same fundamentals that had been passed down for generations, Roy tore up the rulebook and built his own. Traditional boxing wisdom says you keep your hands up at all times. Roy did the opposite. He trained with his hands down, relying on reflexes, head movement, and razor-sharp timing to defend himself. With his hands free, he could launch punches from unexpected angles and generate explosive power without warning. Textbook trainers emphasized balance and a solid stance. Roy practiced fighting off balance, teaching his body to throw punches and counter while leaning in strange positions, turning what would be mistakes for other fighters into weapons of unpredictability. Most boxers are taught that straight punches are the most efficient. Roy ignored that rule too. He drilled punches from every imaginable angle, hooks while moving backward, overhands from odd positions, even uppercuts while leaning away. The randomness made him a nightmare to prepare for. Even the golden rule of keeping your chin tucked didn't apply to Roy. Instead of hiding behind a tight guard, he relied on constant head movement. His chin might have been higher than traditionalists liked, but because it was always moving, it became a target opponents couldn't pin down. But maybe his boldest departure came in how he conditioned his body. Where most fighters trained for 12-round endurance, Roy built his workouts around explosive intervals. His training mimicked his fighting style: sprints, plyometric circuits, and high-intensity drills that pushed him to the edge before quick recovery. The payoff was clear. Opponents who prepared with standard endurance training would start to slow down, but Roy maintained his speed and sharpness deep into fights. Even his approach to weight classes broke the mold. While others tried to be the biggest man at a given weight, Roy stayed lean and prioritized speed. This allowed him to move up and down divisions with ease, carrying his advantages no matter the weight. Roy Jones Jr. didn't just bend the rules of boxing, he shattered them, and in doing so, he created a style no one had ever seen before, and few have been able to replicate since. The science behind the magic. What made Roy Jones Jr.'s training so effective wasn't just its unconventional nature, it was the science behind it. Whether he realized it or not, many of his methods lined up perfectly with cutting-edge sports science and neurology. His emphasis on multisport training was building what scientists call motor learning transfer, skills from one activity improving performance in another. By playing multiple sports, Roy gave his nervous system a massive library of movement patterns to draw from in the ring. His speed work, essentially advanced plyometrics, trained what's known as rate of force development, how quickly muscles generate maximum power. This is why Roy could unleash explosive punches from seemingly relaxed positions. His visualization wasn't just mental, it was physical. Through neuroplasticity, every time Roy imagined a fight, he was rewiring his brain to react with greater speed and precision. Even his approach to strength training was ahead of its time. By focusing on explosive functional movements rather than just bulk, Roy built power that directly translated into athletic performance. Most importantly, his holistic approach, blending physical, mental and technical work into one system, triggered what sports scientists call supercompensation, the body adapting to rise beyond its previous limits. The result wasn't just a great boxer, but an athlete operating on a higher plane. Roy Jones Jr. didn't just master boxing, he redefined human performance in combat sports. Conclusion: Roy Jones Jr. didn't just train to be a great boxer, he trained to transcend the limitations that other fighters accepted as unchangeable. While his opponents were perfecting techniques that had been used for decades, Roy was pioneering methods that pushed human performance into uncharted territory. His legacy isn't just his incredible record or his highlight reel knockouts. Roy Jones Jr. proved that the impossible is just another word for not tried yet. He showed us that when you're willing to break every rule, question every assumption, and train like no one has trained before, you can achieve things that others can only dream of. The next time someone tells you something can't be done, remember Roy Jones Jr. Remember the fighter who trained to do the impossible, and then went out and did it, night after night, for over a decade. That's how legends are made. That's how Roy Jones Jr. trained to do the impossible. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into how Roy Jones Jr. really trained to become one of the most gifted fighters we've ever seen. Let me know in the comments, what do you think was the most unique part of his training and style? I'll see you in the next one.